Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Allison Schaberg here at Consolidated Planning Group. We are happy to be here today with the Law Office of Leona Filis and Ray Valdez with the Friends of Down Syndrome. And today what we're going to be talking about are the 8 steps to consider when raising a child with special needs. So I always like to just go over a few housekeeping items. So for those of you that are attending live, we are in webinar mode today, which means that we can't see you or hear you, but we do know that you are there and our chat box is open today. So we do invite you to put your questions in the chat box. We will be monitoring them and getting to as many as possible. Everybody is going to get a copy of today's slides and a link to the recording by email following this presentation, so you don't have to take notes on every single thing that you see today. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you is today we have far more slides than what we could possibly cover in the course of an hour. So we're going in the course of an hour. Anybody that is joining us through podcast, if you would like a copy of today's slides, you can email us at contact@cpgcares.net. That's contact@cpgcares.net. We will be happy to provide you a copy of the slides if you're listening on podcast. So as far as the slides are concerned, we very intentionally left all of the slides in the presentation today because there's a lot of details and a lot of information that will be helpful to you as you are going through and kind of reviewing things after the meeting. But as you know, when it comes to planning for special needs, all of these topics, these 8 steps that we're going to talk about today, they all have enough information that we could have a 1-hour webinar presentation on that specific topic, and we actually do. So what we would say is, you know, if you haven't been, go out and look at the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel. There's over 350 webinars out there on topics related to planning for special needs. So if there is a topic today that you'd like to take a deeper dive on, it is out there. So you can educate yourself that way as well. Consolidated Planning Group is a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We have over 30 years of experience. We are an advisory and consulting firm. People come to us because they have a loved one with a disability that they want to plan for. They might want to plan for their own future and for the future of a loved one that may have care needs 20 to 30 years after they're gone. We help people figure out how much money do they need to fund a special needs trust, who's going to care for my child when I'm gone. We look at various programs that are available, state and federally funded programs, interest lists, and some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So when it comes to planning for special needs, it's really important that we have money in the right buckets to preserve eligibility for state and federally funded programs. Some of those buckets are special needs trust, which Leona is going to talk about today, an ABLE account. We're always trying to preserve our eligibility for Medicaid is basically what we're trying to do. And there's a lot of confusion on that a lot of times because people say, we don't qualify for Medicaid. We make too much money. We have too much money. And there's 109 Medicaid programs in the state of Texas, and there's different requirements for different programs. And so while a lot of programs are going to be based off of the parent's income and assets if the child is under age 18, those Medicaid waivers are going to be based off of the kid's income and assets, and Medicaid eligibility is required for all of those. So we're going to talk about a lot of those things. And then the last thing that I wanted to cover is, you know, the difference of what someone like Leona does and someone like we do. What do we do? What does Consolidated Planning Group do? Because a lot of times we get calls, like someone calling saying, I really need to set up guardianship, or I would like to set up a special needs trust. And we don't do that. Leona, that's the legal side of the house. We're the financial side. So I always, I say it kind of tongue in cheek, but the legal side, they're the paper and we're the money. And both components are extremely important. And we work well together. But when it comes to planning for your loved one, you need both sides. So today, again, we're talking about the 8 steps to consider when raising a child with special needs, and we are excited to be back with Leona today. But before Leona gets started, I would like to just turn it over to Ray, so Ray can talk to us a little bit about the Friends of Down Syndrome.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So I'm the Assistant Director with Friends of Down Syndrome. So what our program is, we are a program for adults with Down syndrome once they've aged out of high school. So what our program offers is lifelong education and learning. We offer vocational training, academics, and we also offer social skills, life skills. We offer music and art, and we also do community outreach and community events. We take our individuals out into the community and we take them into and just different things that they're not able to do with their families, because some of our families are workers and some of them are older and not able to do some of the things. So programs like ours are very vital to all communities of adults with special needs and individuals with special disabilities and things that they can't control in their life. So we are one of those programs that we strive on, bringing a lot of socialization and skills into their life that they're not able to get otherwise. And we, as we were talking about waiver programs, we also accept waiver programs through HCS, Texas Home Living class, as well as we're a private program, so we also do self-pay. So there's more information of that on our website at friendsofdownsyndrome.org. And I know we have a lot to do, so I'll cut it off right there.
Ray, if you will put that website in the chat box and the contact information, so if people are interested in getting their loved ones plugged in with your organization, they can learn how to go about doing that. So thank you for being here with us, and thank you for telling us about Friends of Down Syndrome.
Thank you.
Leona, we are happy that you're here, and we're going to let you take it away.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you so much, Consolidated Planning Group, for inviting me again to speak to you. And I'm excited to see Ray with Friends of Down Syndrome. It's such a great program, and he's going to talk to us a little bit more when we hit the section in the presentation about waiver programs. But I'm Leona Filis with Filis Law Firm, and here's a little disclaimer. We're presenting information for educational purposes. But basically, Filis Law Firm, what we do is we focus on helping families with children with special needs. And a lot of the discussions I've had with other parents who have children with special needs bring up all these issues where there's a lack of information about legal rights. And so what we've done is we've put together 8 steps for parents to consider when raising a child with special needs. Next slide. Some of these things parents can do on their own, and some things they'll need an attorney to assist them with. So here's a list of some of the topics or hopefully all the topics we will hit today. But the very first one is the one that I usually talk to people about as soon as I find out they have a child with special needs, which is signing up that child on the interest list for Medicaid waiver programs. And this is something that parents can do on their own. Next slide, please. So waiver programs are something that is a joint effort between the state and federal government. Next slide. And what you'll do is you will call 2 different numbers to put your child on the waiting list. They call them the interest list for Medicaid waiver programs. Here's a list of some of the programs that your child can receive benefits from once they're determined to be eligible to receive these benefits. Ray is going to talk to us a little bit about the HCS, the Home and Community-Based Services. Next slide, please. So for me, my son has autism. He's on the autism spectrum, and he also has ADHD. And so I've seen from a lot of parents who have children who are on the spectrum that CLASS is the best program for their child because of the different specialized therapies that are provided to these kids once they receive benefits. So we're talking about Medicaid waiver programs. And when I first heard about Medicaid waiver programs, all I heard was the Medicaid part of it. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be eligible because I have assets and income that are going to just disqualify my son. And thankfully, a lot of these programs do not look at household income. They'll look at income and assets of the child. So one of the numbers that you should call if you have a child or loved one with special needs is right there on this slide. So DADS is Department of Aging and Disability Services. They were the administrator of a lot of these programs for many years. But now these programs have been taken over by HHS, Health and Human Services Commission, but it is the same phone number. So if you have a child who has a disability, a diagnosis, go ahead and call this number first, the 877-438-5658. And your child may become eligible for services that will be provided for the lifetime of your child. Next slide, please. So CLASS, Community Living Assistance Support and Services, does provide for free to your child all types of therapies, including physical and occupational therapy, speech therapy, but they also provide dental sedation, case management. Even if you need to have some minor home modifications, you can look to the CLASS program in order to to get reimbursed for some expenses that you have around the house, as long as these modifications are tied to your child's disability. Next slide.
Just wanted to mention here on the class waiver. The class waiver is a unique Medicaid waiver because a lot of the Medicaid waivers have a requirement that the individual has an intellectual disability of an IQ of 70 or below, and that is not a requirement of the class waiver. So, you know, there are a lot of people that have plenty of disabilities, but they may not have an intellectual disability. So class waiver is your friend on this one. So I just wanted to mention that. There's a lot of confusion out there on that.
Yes, yes. One of the benefits and why this particular program is so beneficial for kids on the spectrum are the specialized therapies, but it's not just for kids on the spectrum. Now, some of the specialized therapies include aquatic therapy, hippotherapy, which is the combination of horseback riding therapy along with another therapy, massage therapy, music therapy, recreational. There's a lot of benefits to finally getting your child on the class program. Next slide. One of the issues, though, is that there is a long wait for your child to actually start receiving benefits. So like I said, there's like half a dozen programs, which we're going to talk about, which are these Medicaid waiver programs. And you'll see on this chart, there's several of them listed here, including CLASS. DBMD is deafblind with multiple disabilities. HCS, home and community-based services. So this chart is reflecting how long you're going to have to wait in Texas before your child comes off of the waiting list and may become eligible for receiving benefits. And unfortunately, CLASS, there's a lot of people waiting 16 to 17 years before they become eligible or before they're interviewed to see if they're eligible for services. Deafblind with multiple disabilities has a smaller group of applicants. MDCP is medically dependent children's program. A lot of our kids with, let's say, Duchenne muscular dystrophy are on this list, and thankfully the years on this list is significantly less than CLASS or Texas Home Living. Next slide. So Ray is very familiar with home and community-based services waiver program. A lot of our kids with Downs will qualify for HCS services. Ray, can you tell us a little bit about how Friends of Down Syndrome or the Down Syndrome Academy, how that interacts with home and community-based services?
So since we are a private program, we can accept, obviously self-pay, but because a lot of our individuals that attend our program are on Texas Home Living as well as HCS, and she's referring to HCS in this particular slide. So with HCS, what happens is the individuals get certain benefits, as some of you may know and some of you may not know. And some of those benefits are for rehabilitation centers and programs for life skills, vocational, job training. So we offer all that. And so when an individual would like to attend our program, they have to be aged out of high school. And if that particular individual is 18 and aged out of high school, already graduated, we will accept an individual. But with the programs in place at most high schools, they can be in high school up to 21. And I've heard of some cases 22, but mostly in Texas, it's 21, I believe. So once they age out, they can then, if they have a state waiver program that they're on, they can actually come to us, interview, do an application, and then we would then have the parents have their HCS waiver provider contact us. We do the whole contract process. If they're approved for our program, they can then actually come, depending on their waiver. And most of them can come up to 5 days, but we've had some individuals that they were only allowed 3 days. Some of them were only allowed 2 to 4 days or things like that, because some of them are also in other programs. So you're not limited to our program alone. You can go to our program as well as something that does more in the arts, or something that goes into just job training. There are a lot of programs in Houston that are different than ours and that are for all special needs and disabilities, but ours is just for Down syndrome adults. But that's the great thing about the waiver program, is that you don't have to just say, oh, I'm only going to Friends of Down syndrome. No, you can actually have more socialization and go to more skills programs for your adults. So, and with HCS, we are one of those people that we accept HCS, and that does pay for us to come here. And now with HCS, since the state has now transitioned to it, it's an hourly rate. So they pay us only a certain amount of hours. But for us particularly, you don't have to just only come here that amount of hours. We actually will take your individual the entire day. And then, of course, we do the billing and stuff is on us, not on you. So your individual will be taken care of here, and it will be paid for by your HCS waiver program.
And Friends of Down Syndrome at the Down Syndrome Academy, it's a day habilitation program. And for me, I wasn't sure exactly what that meant, but I've been on site many times, and they actually have a lot of different classrooms. They have it set up so nice. So when the students arrive, either through MetroLift or drop off, they have a routine. They have a scheduled day for school, and they get taught, different things, including Ray was really good with the art program, if I remember correctly, with arts and crafts. But, this is just one of the opportunities that are lifelong for your child to receive once they're receiving benefits from these waiver programs.
Correct. And also to what we allow here is because with the services that come with HCS, speech therapy, the nurses that come in and check, and the caseworkers, the coordinators, we allow those people to come here and check in on their individuals. So we have one young man that does his speech therapy here because it's virtual, and he logs in, does his thing, and he'll do it. It's usually right before lunch. We also allow all those people to come here and check on their individuals, because that's a big part of the program, is they have to do on-site visits. They have to do all that, and we allow all that. So that's another thing about our program, is that we try to do the best we can to work well with the HCS waiver providers, as well as their caseworkers and the Harris Centers. We have a lot of Harris Center coordinators that stop by and check on multiple individuals that they're in charge of.
Allison?
Yeah, there's two things I just wanted to mention. There's kind of this is a new pro tip, so write this down. I don't think we put it in the slides, but it used to be, somebody had a question, they've been on the list for 17 or 18 years. And it used to be that you had to call your local authority. So if you were in Houston, your local authority is Harrison, or if you're in Fort Bend County, it's Texana. You used to have to call your local authority to find out where your child is on the list. And as of the end of last year, where your child is on these interest lists is on the website, Your Texas Benefits, and you create a login. You log in. If you already have a Medicaid, you have a login, but you log in, and on the right-hand side there's something that says interest list. And so you can see exactly where your child is on these lists now without having to call your local authority. So I know personally as a parent, I thought that was awesome. I'm pretty happy about that. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and I know we've got to move, the HCS waiver is the only waiver that there is a such thing as a crisis diversion. And what a crisis diversion slot, I like to mention that to people because a lot of people don't know that there is a such thing as a crisis diversion HCS slot. So, we were talking about the 17-year waiting list, and what a crisis diversion slot moves you to is right now. And what is a crisis? The individual is a threat to themselves or others. They are at risk of being placed. The key is at risk of being placed outside of the home. So if we have someone, there's all kinds of crises. Maybe a parent died or became ill. Maybe the parent that was a caregiver became ill, or maybe the other parent became ill, and now the other parent needs to care for that person. That could be an example of a crisis. A death is a crisis. There's many things that would be constituted as crisis. It's not just they're a threat to themselves or others, or they're trying to hurt somebody, or it's not just that. But I just want people to know that those do exist, and you work through your local authority if in fact you have a crisis. But again, with the HCS waiver, we were talking earlier that the class waiver is the only one that doesn't require an intellectual disability. So you truly could have a crisis that would otherwise constitute a crisis and to get that crisis diversion slot. But if that individual doesn't have an intellectual disability with the IQ below 70, they are not going to qualify for the HCS crisis. And there is no maybes on that. It's a hard, fast rule. It's just kind of the way it is. So
you can, if you don't mind, if we can go to slide 17 and kind of tell people what to have prepared when it's time to make that call. So if you're in Texas, that top number there, oh, I'm sorry, can you go back one? If you're in Texas, you'll call that 877 number at top. I'm used to dealing with Harris County. So Harris County used to be called MHMRA, their local authority, but now it's the Harris Center. But I have the number on this slide for you to call. And I have the list of items of information that you'll need to have in order to answer the questions of the agent who answers your call. So these are things to think about. This is basically, we're talking about 2 10-minute phone calls to place your child on interest list that could take several years before they get these services. But these services are free. So please, if you don't have your child on these interest lists, go ahead and make those calls. Next slide, please. Okay. So this chart reflects from several months ago how many people are actually on these interest lists. So in total, if you add up all the interest lists, there's over 300,000 people waiting. That's not exactly accurate because there's a lot of people that sign up their child on multiple lists, which I recommend that you do. So sign them up for class, HCS, MDCP if they're still minors. Sign them up for all of these, not deafblind with multiple disabilities, if that doesn't apply. But go ahead and sign your child up on all these lists. Your child can receive benefits from one program at a time. So maybe you'll start off with MDCP, Medically Dependent Children's Program, And then your child may come off of the waiting list for one of these other programs, which is better suited for them. Then you stop receiving benefits from one of these programs and switch over to the next program. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, now this is just a idea to give you about the emphasis on these Medicaid waiver programs and opening up spots to allow for more people to receive benefits. As you saw in the previous slide, there was over 300,000 people added up on these interest lists. The Texas legislature has only opened up about 1,500 slots for people to get new services. So that's something that maybe we can work on in Texas. Next slide. Get hip. So let's say your child, let's say you have an income for your household, which would not allow your child to receive regular Medicaid benefits, but your child comes off of the interest list before they're 18 and they start receiving benefits and Medicaid, or they're over 18 and your child receives Medicaid and qualifies on their own. If you, as a parent, have someone on your employer provided health insurance, and every month you're out of your paychecks, at least half of the cost of the premium for that policy is taken out of your checks, then you can contact this program called Get Hip. And you can see if you would qualify for a reimbursement check from the state of Texas, who would rather you keep your child with special needs on Medicaid and use your insurance as a primary insurance, and then keep Medicaid as a secondary insurance. So this is a benefit that a lot of families don't know about, where they can have a little bit more money in their pockets to spend on their child with this reimbursement program. But, you know, your child has to have medical expenses, which would cost the state of Texas, if you only had Medicaid, about the same amount or more than the reimbursement checks.
I'm going to ask if the HIP would continue once the child turns 18.
Yes, because as long as it's a dependent receiving Medicaid, then the state of Texas that pays for Medicaid and also pays for the Get Hip program, it would behoove the state to pay for the Get Hip program and reimburse you every month a solid amount, whatever your premium costs are that are taken out of your paycheck. That's a solid amount, rather than have Medicaid pick up the bill for 100% of the medical expenses for your child and not have a known quantity of how much that's going to cost them every year.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing is, you know, when a child, and I just want to chime in here that it's important. I believe that it's important to keep your child on your group health plan, even if they are eligible for Medicaid, because your group health plan is going to give you freedom of choice to take them where you want to. And you may be limited to providers. You will be limited to providers in Medicaid. And so I am a fan of obviously having the group health insurance in addition to Medicaid, even if they're eligible for Medicare as well. But Medicaid is always the last payer. So the whole point of this program is if you have health insurance, we're going to reimburse you for the premiums for your health insurance, because it's in our best interest, because your health insurance is going to pay first, and it's going to make us basically not have to pay much at all or anything, because we're always the last payer. So that's kind of the why behind it. And a lot of people, I'm so glad you talked about this, because a lot of people don't even know that it exists. And some people haven't messed with it because they found it frustrating, or they found it hard to get approved or to stay approved. And I heard more favorable feedback. I think it was pretty tough in the COVID zone. But I've heard a lot more favorable feedback on it in the last year or so, and improvement in that area. And if anybody has other experience, or good, bad, or indifferent, if you want to share that in the chat, we're happy for you to share in the
Yes, and Amanda in the chat's correct. They'll reimburse you. The HIP program will reimburse you for the entire amount that's taken out of your paycheck, not just a portion of the premium that covers your child. So it's employee plus spouse plus dependents. Our next step that I want people to think about, and this is if your child has an intellectual disability, you should get something called a DID, it's a determination of intellectual disability. Next slide. And you can get this done at your local authority. For example, if you live in Harris County, it would be at the Harris Center. And you want to make sure that you have a test that the results would be used by the Social Security Administration when they're looking to see if your child is eligible for benefits from these waiver programs. They're going to want this IQ test from a reliable source such as the Harris Center. Next slide. Okay, so step 3. Now this is where, so far we've been talking about things that you as parents can do. Now we're talking about something that you'll need an attorney to do. So with step 3, we want you, because you're going through all this mess to try and get benefits for your child, we want to make sure that you preserve eligibility for your child. Next slide. There's something called a supplemental needs trust. There's different types of supplemental needs trust, but for our purposes, we like to talk to parents to prepare them for long-term care and eligibility for their child for the rest of that child's life by doing something such as getting a third-party supplemental needs trust. Now, you would want to talk to an attorney who is experienced not just in drafting trust, but special needs trust. What you have to do is contact an attorney. You would probably, as the parents, be the grantors of the trust. You would be the initial trustees. You would manage the trust, and your child with a disability would be the beneficiary. Now, third-party trust has its own taxpayer ID number, and although I did put on the slide that you would file fiduciary tax returns, that's only if you really fund the trust and then it earns a certain amount of income. So for a lot of people, next slide, please, they have a special needs trust and they want to know, well, if I put money in it, what are we going to spend? What are we allowed to spend the money on? So here's a list of quality of life expenses that you can spend from the funds in a special needs trust. And Allison can talk to you about how to fund that trust. So there's different programs that Allison or someone at Consolidated Planning Group can talk to you about, but you need to set up the trust first. And it's pretty easy the way that we handle special needs trust. We create it as a standalone document for you parents and your friends to point at that trust when you're drafting your will. So we don't want your child to inherit any assets that would exceed the $2,000. The reason for that is that we're trying to keep them eligible for Medicaid and Medicaid waiver programs. And for the child to be able to qualify, they have to make little to no income, and their assets cannot exceed a value of $2,000. So if they inherit something from you, you may cause them to be kicked off of Medicaid or the waiver program.
This is such an important topic, and if anybody that's attended our webinars, I probably say this almost every single webinar because it is so critically important, and it happens all the time, where accidentally someone leaves either their own child or like a grandparent makes their grandchild a beneficiary on a life insurance contract. Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect example. Another example, and this is fewer and far between because pensions are almost a thing in the past, but where we live in the oil and gas world, Pensions are a thing around here, and a lot of times people forget those pensions, the old 401ks, old 403bs. And so if you've done this, I always say, don't worry, don't beat yourself up. You can fix this. But what a lot of people do, they name their beneficiary. If you're married, they name their beneficiary their spouse, and that's their primary beneficiary. And then they have what's a secondary beneficiary. It's also known as a contingent beneficiary. So if I die and my spouse is already dead and gone, then who's going to get the money? And then what people do is they name their children and divide it equally amongst their children. That happens a lot. And so first off, we're not fans of naming minor children beneficiaries on anything, because it sits in trust until they turn 18 and then they get all the money. And it's never a good idea for an 18-year-old neurotypical or not to get sums of money at age 18. But of course, we don't want to name the individual with a disability directly. We want to do it indirectly by way of the special needs trust, because the special needs trust is a way that we can leave money to said individual that will protect their eligibility for these state and federally funded programs. So we're talking about SSI, Medicaid, Medicaid waivers. So it's really, really important. So if you're sitting here and you say, oh, snap, I need to check my beneficiaries. Well, first off, if you have not checked your beneficiaries in the last 3 to 5 years, you definitely need to, so mark that down. And the second thing is it's not a calamity. It's not a calamity until somebody dies and they leave the kid the money, right? But for right now, if you have named things incorrectly, all you have to do is call the carrier. If it's a life insurance company, call the carrier directly and get a change of beneficiary form. Call your HR department, update your HR, your beneficiary forms for any life insurance, disability, pensions, 401ks. Through your employer. And don't forget, sometimes it's top of mind, like, where am I working now? But don't forget those old employers that you may have had some retirement programs from in the past. It's super, super important. And I know that was kind of a rabbit hole, but I would tell you that I would say when we're doing webinars like this, probably as much as 90% of people have some kind of wonky beneficiary that they just simply didn't know. And here's the other thing. When she's talking about these legal documents, I think it's very, very important that you work with a specialist. You work with an attorney that is specifically nuanced in special needs, because you're going to have documents that are right. And that is really, really important, because they can fail to qualify as, in the eyes of the Social Security Administration. So it's really, really important to work with a specialist when it comes to these documents. So there's a lot of things that you can do yourself, but when it comes to your legal documents for a family member with special needs, that is not it. And then the last thing that I want to mention is, because there's so few advisors in the U.S. that work with special needs, it is very unlikely that your parents or anybody that might be leaving an inheritance, it's very unlikely that they have any background in special needs. So when grandma and grandpa comes in and they say, well, we have this grandson, we sure do love him, and he has special needs and we want to leave money to him, they say, okay, what's his name? So I always just want to mention, be intentional in having conversations with loved ones in your life that may possibly leave some type of inheritance to your child, because those are some of the oops money that we find that slips through the cracks. That happens all the time.
That's great. That's great advice. Yeah, so we're talking about long-term benefits for your child, lifelong benefits, and we want to make sure that we preserve their eligibility for that. And to preserve their eligibility, they can't have assets that exceed the value of $2,000. Now, inheritance is one thing. You point to the trust to inherit. You can list the trust on these designation of beneficiary forms that Allison was talking about for life insurance policies, retirement accounts. But there's another way where you can preserve your child's eligibility for benefits and help them grow some money. And this is through the ABLE account. And it's also called the 529A savings account. So go ahead and go to the next slide. This is a bank account that you as a parent can set up for your child with special needs. There is a variety, variety of types of accounts, but they're savings accounts. So this is a way where your child can put their birthday money or gift money into a bank account, and you can even select the type of savings account where you pick stocks, and the interest earned on the stocks are not counted as income. You don't have to, they're tax free. Sorry. So every year, it seems like they increase the amount that you can contribute to the savings account and not trigger disqualification. So typically the maximum amount that you can contribute to this type of savings account is tied to the annual gift tax exclusion amount. So right now in 2024, it's $18,000 that you can, or a combination of you and other family members and friends, can contribute to this particular special type of savings account. So this came about a long time ago, where there was a person with special needs who was trying to save money from their part-time job to pay for a car, which would have been an exempt asset under SSI rules. But they couldn't save more than $2,000 without becoming ineligible for the benefits. So thankfully now every state has their form of the ABLE account or the 529A savings account. So this is a way where parents can save money on behalf of their child and not trigger disqualification of benefits that will be for their child for their lifetime.
A couple of things I wanted to mention that come up in our practice all the time. People ask questions like, why do I need a special needs trust and an ABLE account? And one of the big things, and we do have entire presentations on the ABLE account, that you can pay for food and shelter out of an ABLE account without a 1/3 reduction to SSI. So that is one big reason. While you can pay for food and shelter out of a special needs trust, as it stands right now, there would be a 1/3 reduction to SSI. That is one reason. The other reason is you see at the bottom of the screen where it says only the first 100,000 doesn't impact SSI. So if you have one penny over 100,000, you'll lose SSI and Medicaid. So that is important, because if you ask your friend Google about how much money you can have in an ABLE account, I think it's up to 500 or 550,000. That's what you're going to see online. And that is true, but after that $100,000, then you wouldn't qualify for SSI or Medicaid. So anybody that's receiving benefits, you want to keep that number below 100,000. And another key thing that you need to know is that you cannot make a beneficiary the 529 ABLE account for said child. So while you can make your beneficiary the special needs trust for the benefit of little Johnny, you cannot make a 529 a beneficiary. And so those are so they work beautifully together is the point. Sometimes people just don't understand that they might need both, or why in fact do they need both. So I just wanted to mention that.
Allison, that's a really good point. Yeah, you in your wills, you can't list the 529A bank account. It's just a bank account, but a trust is an entity. It's treated as an entity, and it has its own taxpayer ID number. So on this slide is another list of qualified disability expenses, things that you can buy, spend money on from your 529A bank account and not jeopardize eligibility. Next slide. Okay, now I don't sell life insurance or disability insurance, but this is something that parents that have children with special needs do need to focus on and think about. So this is life insurance on the parents and disability insurance on the parents. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We want to make sure that both parents are covered for life insurance. This is kind of a theme that I've seen where parents of children with special needs, you have a breadwinner parent and a caregiver parent. And the breadwinner parent may have a lot of benefits at work, which would include life insurance and disability insurance. And yes, should that parent die or become disabled that would impact the family negatively, where this type of insurance would help them. But don't forget that caregiver parent, if he or she passes away or becomes incapacitated themselves, you may need a whole team of people to take over and do all the things that that caregiver parent does on a daily basis. So make sure the caregiver parent is covered for life insurance and disability insurance.
I say the longer you wait to get this stuff in place, the more expensive it is. And you are also running the risk that you might be uninsurable later in your life. One of the many reasons that people use life insurance for this is to fund the special needs trust. Many people save their entire careers for their retirement, that one day they're going to retire, they're going to start drawing Social Security, they may have a pension, and they're going to draw down some of their savings that they saved up over the last 30 to 35 years. Most people are going to need their retirement assets in retirement. So then it lends the question of, well, where is the money going to come from to fund the special needs trust? And so what we suggest is that a person keeps their assets nimble in retirement, so that way you can have the semblance of retirement that you hoped for and wanted to have. When you have life insurance that's going to fund the special needs trust, then you know for sure that you've got your basis covered there. And sometimes people are hopeful that their retirement assets, that there'll be several $1 million left over that will fund the trust, and that is the case for a lot of people. But for a lot of people, it is not. So this is the other way, because a lot of times people feel pretty overwhelmed. When that's something that we do a future cost of care, like how much do I need to fund that special needs trust? And on the low end, they come out at 2 million, and we've seen them all the way up to 10 million, right? And so anywhere in between, and that's a pretty tall order. So that's where this really comes into play, and it's pretty important. All right, we are up to step 6.
All right, estate planning for the individuals, for the parents. Next slide. So a lot of people are familiar with these terms: last will and testament, power of attorney. So these are different legal documents that you should consider having in place right now. So, and as far as the last will and testament, we want to make sure that when you name your child to receive benefits, to receive inheritance, you want the child with a disability to have that trust be the recipient of their inheritance. That way, those assets from inheritance are shielded from Social Security looking at it and counting it as an asset. Cash is an asset. So if your child inherits money from you, if it exceeds $2,000, then they're no longer eligible for certain government benefits like SSI, Medicaid waiver programs. We also want to make sure that, if you yourselves, parents, have a power of attorney and medical power of attorney, HIPAA release. These are documents that you as parents should have in place, again, just in case you have a disability, that you become incapacitated. You have someone who can step in and help you make decisions, or make decisions on your behalf if you can no longer make decisions that affect you and your family.
I always add here, so we're talking about you and your family, but when it comes to these, the HIPAA authorization, the power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, think about this for any aging parents that you have in your life. Have they updated their documents lately? It's real good to have this in place. Don't wait until a stroke happens or something major crisis happens. And then I'm a huge fan of having these documents in place for your neurotypical kids that are 18 plus, that you've sent off to college. It's real important to have these for them too.
Yes, definitely. But whenever you are going to have a will drafted for yourself or your family members who want to leave inheritance for your child with special needs, make sure that that attorney understands SSI eligibility and the need for special needs trust, and to have that proper language in place so that your child's eligibility is protected. Because if you don't have a will in place, we do have something called intestate succession. Next slide, please. In Texas, we have default rules which will apply in the event that you don't have a valid will that you leave behind. So if you're the last of the parent to pass away and you don't have a will, then by default, your children will inherit your assets. And so if that is what happens, then your child may have at that point more than $2,000 worth of assets. And if your child who has a disability is on a government program or is waiting to receive benefits from a government program, that asset that exceeds $2,000 will destroy their eligibility. So planning is important, planning properly with an attorney and then with a financial planner like Consolidated Planning Group. These are important things to have in place right now for your child's future. Next slide. So that's okay. There's different rules in place for what needs to be in place for a will to be valid. And, you know, that's fine. You have to be 18 years of age, have a couple of witnesses that are at least 14 years old, and you have to have capacity. So Allison was talking about talking to your elderly parents about having a will. You want to go ahead and do these documents while your parents still have capacity. Next slide. So power of attorney, that's fine. Allison said, get a power of attorney over your child that's going off to college. Yes, that is something that we recommend. Also the medical power of attorney and a HIPAA release. HIPAA release allows you to access your child's medical records so that you can make an informed decision if you need to, if you're going to use a medical power of attorney. Next slide. So we do have a little bit to talk about for education. This is mainly a topic that parents with children with special needs, they're going to be handling a lot of these issues on their own or with a special education advocate. And so it's basically, you want to understand that your child is eligible for special education services if they have a disability. And it's a federally mandated rule that the school districts go out into the community and try to find children who would benefit from special education services. So if you think your child needs special education services, go to the district and ask for an evaluation. Next slide.
I just wanted to mention for anybody that maybe has a new diagnosis or they have small children and they haven't kind of gone through this process yet, the whole ARD process and having an IEP or a 504 in place, we do have entire webinars on this topic, how to ask for an evaluation, what your rights are, and it kind of goes through all of that. And what I would say is educate yourself early on that, because getting our kids the accommodations that they need to be successful early really, really matters. It matters on how soon they're going to read or, you know, write or any of the things that we need them to do. So, but there is a lot of help out there, so don't feel overwhelmed on that. And again, check out the YouTube channel. And again, we mentioned earlier in the very beginning that we probably had more slides than what we could get to, and we put that on purpose intentionally into the slides. We're going to give a copy. Everybody is going to receive a copy of today's slides and a link to the recording. If you're listening by podcast and you want a copy of the slides, just email us at contact@cpgcares.net. And we will send you a copy of those slides. But everybody that has registered for today's meeting, you're going to get a copy of them anyway, so you don't even have to email. So And thanks for putting all this information in there. It's really, really helpful, Leona.
Thank you. One of the real quick, one more thing about the education rights. If your child is in a classroom, most likely it would be life skills, I think is a term that a lot of our districts use, where it's self-contained. There's even a bathroom in that classroom, and typically your student will be in that classroom all day. Make sure that your school has cameras in that classroom. A lot of kids who are in these types of classrooms are nonverbal, and they can't communicate what has happened to them in the event that they come home with a bruise or an injury, or maybe a different behavior that makes them not want to go back to school. You can request from the school to have the footage reviewed to see if that camera footage has captured something that would explain what's been happening to your child in that classroom. Next slide. The last topic is guardianship and lesser restrictive alternatives. So for a lot of our kids that are approaching adulthood, they're about to transition into being an adult. And in Texas, for our purposes, that is when that child turns 18. We want to make sure that our children are taken care of, whether they're able to handle it themselves or handle it with some help, or just have you, the parent, continue doing what you've been doing for them for the past 18 years. There's different types of guardianship. For our purposes, we just talk about guardianship of the person, not of the estate. We don't want our children to have an estate. We want them to have less than $2,000 worth of assets so that they qualify for government benefits. Next slide. So what we want to do is have an assessment whether or not the child requires guardianship. Now, in your ARD meetings, sometimes the IEP committee will talk about that. Next slide. So in some cases, our children have capacity to contract. They can take a power of attorney, read it, and understand it, because their reading comprehension level is significant enough where they do have the understanding of what they're doing if they're going to sign a power of attorney and medical power of attorney. So if that's the case, then go ahead and when your child turns 18, have them sign a power of attorney, medical power of attorney, supportive decision-making agreement. Next slide. But if they can't, if they cannot understand what they're signing, and a doctor through a physician's certificate has validated that, then go ahead and contact an attorney for a guardianship. Next slide. So for guardianships, we have, it's a legal process. We file an application. Typically, it's one guardian per ward, but there are exceptions. If it's the biological parents, they can be co-guardians of the proposed ward. And it is a process that can take 3 months, 6 months. It depends. One thing to think about whenever you're approaching your child's 18th birthday, as early as 6 months before the 18th birthday, you can have that guardianship application filed with the court and start the process, so that once your child does have their 18th birthday, then you can have a hearing, and then the guardianship, letters of guardianship can be issued to you, which is basically like a power of attorney, but supercharged from a judge, so that you can continue to receive notifications from school that you have an IEP. You can go with them into the examination room with the doctor. You can help your child make decisions or make decisions on their behalf, just like you have been for their first 18 years of life. So those are things to think about when your child's approaching 18 years of age.
I know this is a scary topic for a lot of people, and a lot of people, I hear this all the time. I don't really know what we need. There's some families that know beyond a shadow of doubt they're going to have guardianship, and they just know that. But then there's a lot of families that are still hopeful and optimistic. Their kids might not be there yet, but they're getting where they're going. And I always just like to encourage people to say, when you schedule that meeting with the attorney, you don't have to go in there with guns ablazing of what you want. The attorney is going to sit down with you, and they want to learn a lot more about your child and what brings you here. And they're going to go through what those options are and kind of go over kind of the rules, the laws in the state are the least restrictive, most appropriate, and they're going to help you get there. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and putting off that appointment because of that feeling like you have to have it all together, you absolutely don't. So I just want to encourage you there. Well, we did a great job. It's 1 o'clock, and we got through our slides today. So thank you for being here with us today. We've got Leona's contact information. She does have a free 30-minute initial consultation. So if you need legal help and you want to reach out to her, you absolutely should to learn more, whether you have a special needs trust you would like her to review, or you need to have a conversation regarding guardianship, or maybe it's time to update your will and powers of attorney and things like that. We recommend that families have their documents looked at every every 3 to 4 years, really, because the laws change. I just got back from the UT Special Needs law conference, and it was, going over the law changes and kind of how all of that stuff works. You guys are all going to get a copy of today's slides. It's going to have a link. Everything that she talked about today, it'll have a link to any of our upcoming webinars. It's going to have all of Leona's contact information. We offer a free personalized consultation to talk to you about the planning that you've done so far and kind of go over what next steps you might need to take to get to where you need to be. We had another question in the chat box earlier on, and that question was, once on a Medicaid waiver, do you have to renew or rectify Medicaid waivers? Like, can you get kicked off a Medicaid waiver? Is there any kind of, I've never heard of somebody getting kicked off, but Ray, can you just answer that? I know you have a caseworker with your waiver, and you should direct that question directly to the caseworker, but tell us about that, Ray.
So actually, Karen was here listening. She was saying, what were you saying that happened? So
a lot of this, our individuals got kicked off during the, I'm sorry, I'm sitting here on the side, during COVID. And so it was the mass with Medicaid, and they got put back onto the program, but it's taken them months to get put back onto their waiver program. And so they have to just stay in contact with their providers. And once the providers will give them the form that they have to refill out. It's paperwork on the parents' behalf that they had to fill out because it was handled, I guess, somewhere along the line, someone did it the wrong way, and a whole bunch of the individuals got put on the wrong waiver. Taken off of Medicaid. So it's slowly happening. We had several of our individuals that happened to, and they just need to contact the provider if that's the case, because what they will tell them is that they won't pay anymore for them to come to our organization, the day program. They wouldn't pay for that anymore. It became self-pay. And so that's how they found out about it. So if they're having issues with that, they just need to contact their provider and find out, if the provider would be the one that would tell them that. And I'm not
most of the time there needs to be a new H1200 Medicaid application, which you can download and fill it out and send it in by fax or mail. You can take it to a Medicaid office, or you could go to your Texas benefits and fill out the new H1200. There were a lot of people that were required to reapply. And so I guess what I would say in closing today is that pay attention to those letters that you get from Health and Human Services, from the Social Security Administration, anything regarding your Medicaid waivers. Read it entirely. I know at the end of a long day, you get that mail and you don't want to read it. It's this 10-page letter. But it oftentimes has, you have this many days to respond. Oftentimes it's 60 days. Sometimes they sent you the letter late and you have like 2 days because, so you got to pay attention to those things and just take action. But the H1200 Medicaid application often needs to be resubmitted. So you can get a lot of information by logging into your Texas benefits and looking, and you can also get a lot of information by calling 211 and speaking to a representative specifically on that topic, Medicaid in general, but you'll have a caseworker specifically for your Medicaid waivers. So guys, we're out of time for today.
And keep all of your addresses and phone numbers constantly updated, because that was another issue we had. Was one person got sent their application, the renewal application got sent to the wrong address, and then they just thought, oh, you don't want to renew it. So definitely keep all that information up to date as much as possible. It's very helpful.
Yeah, and those Medicaid renewals are no joke. I know I've had to do them for my kids. I mean, and it takes a good hour, 2 hours to pull all the documents together that they want. You know, they want 3 months of bank statements, all the stuff that they're asking for. It takes a good amount of time to pull it together, but it is, you know, well worth it. So whether they're getting whether they're getting Medicaid or they're getting SNAP benefits, those renewals are real important. Thanks everyone for your time today. We'll get you guys a copy of those slides and you know, a link to the recording. And I appreciate all of you being here with us today. And I hope everybody has a great week. Take care.
Thank you. You as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Good to see you, Leona.